As we mentioned earlier, today is World Press Freedom Day. Many journalists throughout Africa are calling for more press freedom, saying it is a vital component of democracy. I spoke with a few journalists who are in Washington as part of the World Press Freedom Day observations.
In the context of South Sudan, the World Press Freedom Day is very important because we are an emerging nation. We are starting from zero onward. We feel in the new country with the new government, we have to join where people are on. Press freedom is very vital for the democracy and for the development of South Sudan as the world's latest new country.
I think freedom of expression is not something that is given. Even you have it, you need to fight, to enforce it. And in that day, I want to remember a very best journalist from my country who was killed in 1998, no reason. And I think thanks to this guy, some journalists in my country have started doing investigative journalism. And many people emulate him, and I think it is a very good thing. And we need to fight and go forward and get more liberty, freedom of expression in that country.
The media environment is challenging. There is a private press and there is a government press. So we're trying to create a forum. Both the government and the private media work together. So when we work this project, one of the example or model is the Washington, D.C. National Press Club. 100 years ago, blacks were not allowed to be a journalist. Females were not allowed to be a journalist, but it evolves to be one of the prominent platform or institution in Washington, D.C. So even though there is a polarized, at times challenging working environment in Ethiopia, we are trying to engage and dialogue the government to open up and allow press freedom to flourish in Ethiopia.
Well, joining us now for an in-depth discussion on the press in Africa is Karin Deutsch-Karlekar, Senior Researcher and Managing Editor of Freedom House of the Press Survey at Freedom House. And Karin, I'd like to welcome you to our show today. Thank you so much for being here. Well, good news for Africa for a change. It has the largest numerical improvement of any region. I want to isolate three countries that you'd say noted the most improvements. Zimbabwe, Zambia, Senegal. Why those countries? What did they do in Kenya?
In Kenya.
Just among.
Well, Kenya was, they passed a new constitution last year, and that had more protections for press freedom. And there was also actually a lessening of sort of legal cases brought against journalists. So in Kenya, it was really legal developments which led to the change. Senegal, in recent years, we've seen actually the government really sort of lashing out at independent or what they perceive as critical news outlets, both via legal cases, defamation lawsuits, as well as an advertising boycott. And that actually was a little bit better this year. So Senegal also improved.
I'm sure many are surprised Zimbabwe.
Yeah, actually, well, Zimbabwe does continue to have one of the worst media environments on the African continent. So it's, from a very low base. But we did actually see improvements last year. And this was primarily in the regulatory sector. It was because of the licensing, finally, of a number of independent newspapers. And that was something that Zimbabweans had really been waiting for a long time, since the Daily News had been shut down in 2002. So that was a positive development, although I would say that, as of last year and even as of last week, some of these newspapers like Newsday have been facing harassment. So it's definitely not a huge jump for Zimbabwe, but we did note a small improvement for last year.
Now, of course, among the worst, North Africa in general, and I guess for obvious reasons, but then there are also others, Equatorial Guinea, Sudan, Cote d'Ivoire. How did they come on that list?
Well, Sudan we actually saw, that's been improving in recent years, but Sudan, we did see this sort of pre-election crackdown on the press last year, and they did reintroduce pre-publication censorship, which they actually had gotten rid of, so that was a negative development. As you said, Equatorial Guinea and Eritrea continue to be the two worst on the continent. In Cote d'Ivoire, obviously, there was this sort of pre-election crackdown as well, and they were trying to shut down some of the news outlets, both local outlets as well as some of the foreign outlets. So we're hoping, this year will show Cote d'Ivoire with an improvement, but last year showed decline.
Now, you noted earlier in the little clip we ran on you how dismal the real state of global press freedoms are. Only 15% of the world's population enjoy press freedoms. Why is it so small?
No, we've actually, it's since we've started looking at this population data, this year actually it was the lowest percentage of people that have access to what we term the fully free media. As you said, 15%, which is 1 in 6 people around the world, and that's a pretty dismal figure if you look at the population numbers. And as well, the people in not free media environments are 43%. So that's, you really have a lessening of press freedom. What we've seen is that as the media environment has opened and actually developed in certain countries in terms of more free broadcast media, that there have been these crackdowns on journalists.
What characterizes a not free press environment? What is going on in
Well,
such
usually
cases?
it means that the broadcast is either almost completely under the control or is significantly influenced by the government. And as you know, the broadcast environment is really where most people get their media and news from, and particularly in Africa. Print media doesn't really have the same level of distribution. Also, you see usually either high levels of assassination, murder, harassment of the press, physical attacks, or you know, a high level of legal cases as well. So those are two of the main ways that the government would use to crack down on media that it doesn't like.
Now, we only have a few minutes to go, but this focus of this year's World Press Freedom Day is this outburst or explosion of internet and mobile devices, which are really helping maybe or might help break through this press repression?
No, definitely. I mean, we see that in most countries, the media environment, even if it has a bad media environment, that the digital media and the internet will be more free. And so that's it's like an area of promise and hope, and particularly in Africa, I think, where the access to mobile phones in particular and the internet is growing. It's doubled in the last 2 years. That's really a really positive growth area. Although we have seen that governments are reacting to this. I mean, we just saw in Uganda they were trying to shut down Facebook and Twitter last week because of these protests. So we see that the promise, but also the fact that the government may crack down on these new forms of media and technologies.
And obviously one looks at Egypt and how, internet and mobile devices really help to blow
Egypt was
those gates wide open.
Yeah, no, Egypt was fascinating, and we're hoping that they follow through on the opening that took place earlier this year.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Karin
you very much,
Deutsch-Karlekar, Senior Researcher and Managing Editor, Freedom House, the press survey at Freedom House. It's really a pleasure to have you in our studio today.
Thank you so much.